So I'm going to present the results of our black shale partial melting experiments and tell how they help us to understand the assimilation processes in the Duluth complex, Minnesota. And I'd like to acknowledge my collaborators, including Jussi Heinonen from the University of Helsinki, Ferenc Molnar from the Geological Survey of Finland, and Max Schmidt and Felix Marxer from the ETH Zurich. So this is probably quite well known to most of you, but those who are not familiar with the subject, I'd like to say a couple of words about black shales and why to study their partial melting. First of all, black shales are large crustal reservoirs for both carbon and sulfur, and they can contain both of these in weight percent levels. They basically occur on all continents, and they span from Archean to modern days. And for these reasons, they are fairly common wall rocks to many mafic layered intrusions. Some good examples are the Duluth complex, Norilsk, and many Fennoscandian intrusions that host black shales as part of their wall rock assemblage. During contact metamorphosis, black shales usually can release a lot of carbon and sulfur species, both in plutonic and surface environments. And this can lead to assimilation-induced sulfide saturation, and in some cases, release of greenhouse gases. So here's a schematic of a mafic magma conduit intruding black shale. And the mafic magma heats up the black shale, which then starts to partially melt, and also black shale xenoliths start to partially melt. And during partial melting, the black shale may release sulfur to the magma, and this can cause the sulfide saturation. And for example, in the case of Duluth complex, this is fairly well-known process to have taken place. The focus in my research is when the assimilation actually takes place, and what are the reactions in the wall rock that liberate the sulfur, and does the sulfur travel from the wall rock to the magma via a fluid phase or a melt phase? So with these questions in mind, let's move to the Duluth complex, which is our case study. So Duluth complex is located in northeastern Minnesota, highlighted here with red color. And on this larger map, the Duluth complex has been marked with green color. On its eastern side, the Duluth complex intrudes co-magmatic volcanic rocks and dikes, and these are related to the Mesoproterozoic mid-continent rift, as we learned last Friday from Professor Miller's talk. On the western side, it intrudes Archean basement rocks, including granitoids and metavolcanic rocks, and Paleoproterozoic sedimentary rocks, including iron formations, these brown ones, and black shales, Virginia Formation black shale, which is this purple one. So the Duluth complex itself is a multi-stage layered intrusion. It hosts about 10 copper Ni-Cu-PGE deposits, and these are all located close to the foot wall of the complex. The combined size of these mineralizations is about 4,000 million tons at 0.66 weight percent copper and 0.22 weight percent nickel. And based on sulfur isotopic studies, about 75% of the sulfur in the mineralizations actually derive from the Virginia Formation black shale. So here's a schematic presentation of the contact zone between the Duluth complex, so the green color here, and Virginia Formation, the gray color on the bottom. So if we take a look at the contact aureole first, there is the subsolidus dehydration zone, which means that the organic material graphitizes and the hydrous silicates dehydrate, and the pyrite converts to pyrrhotite in this zone. Then there is the incipient melting zone, which means that there is already a little bit of partial melt present, but the original layering of the black shale is still intact. In the actual partial melting zone, the amount of partial melting is high enough that the original texture of the black shale is destroyed, which means that the melt is able to move in this zone, at least a little bit. On the intrusion side, there is this narrow zone of sulfide enrichment, which is the zone that hosts the mineralizations. And also this zone is very rich in Virginia Formation black shale xenoliths. So in order to study this process, what causes the sulfide enrichment and assimilation of the black shale material, we collected a sample from the not contact metamorphosed part of the Virginia Formation. And we tried to simulate the conditions that was experienced by the xenoliths and the contact aureole. So what we did, we took natural black shale powder, put it into cold palladium capsules, such as this one in right up corner here. And then we put the capsule inside an externally heated pressure vessel, applied a pressure of 2 kilobars and temperatures between 700 and 1000 degrees Celsius at 100 degrees Celsius intervals. And these conditions are same as approximated for the actual Virginia Formation black shales in the contact aureole. So here's a backscattered electron image of the starting material in thin section. So very typical black shale containing mostly quartz, muscovite, and chlorite. And if we take a look at the sulfides, we see that there is both chalcopyrite and pyrite present. And pyrite composes about 90% of all the sulfides, and the remaining 10% is mainly chalcopyrite. I have highlighted the copper contents with green color, and this will become apparent soon why I did this. But I'd like to point out that pyrite contains, well, this actual pyrite contains 0.38% copper, but most of them have no copper at all. So this is what the black shale powder looks like after it's been in 700 degrees, 2 kilobars. Silicate reactions are hard to observe in this image, but what you can see, it's full of pore space, which would mean that there was a lot of fluid present. And if we look at the sulfides, we don't find pyrite or chalcopyrite here anymore. It's been completely replaced by pyrrhotite, and the copper content of this pyrrhotite is intermediate between the pyrite and chalcopyrite in the starting material, so 1% in average. And when we did mass balance calculations, we found out that there is mass decrease of solid sulfides between the starting material and 700 degree experiment. So what we think that happens here is that the kerogen and dehydrating silicates react, and they produce this carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen bearing fluid, which then reacts with chalcopyrite and pyrite and converts them to copper-bearing pyrrhotite. And this is associated with the fluid scavenging about half of the total sulfur and about 70% of the total copper in the sulfide phases. If we move to 800 degrees, we see that the partial melting has now begun because the pores are very rounded. And if we look at the pyrrhotites, they now contain more copper than at 700 degrees. And what this means is that the fluid is actually releasing copper and sulfur back to the solid sulfides. And it seems that all the copper is now occupying the solid sulfide phases instead of the fluid. At 900 degrees, there is more melting taking place. The peritectic orthopyroxene is forming. But the pyrrhotites are now compositionally similar to the ones at 800 degrees. At 1000 degrees, the silicate partial melt becomes the most abundant phase. And the sulfides become very rounded, but these are actually solid pyrrhotite. They contain similar amounts of copper compared to 800 and 900 degrees, but now they also have measurable amounts of nickel in them. There is also this other sulfide phase present, and this is actually sulfide melt, which is copper rich, but this is a minor phase at 1000 degrees. Also, something interesting happens at 1000 degrees. The sulfides attach themselves to the fluid droplets. So if you look at the image on the left side, those sulfides that have been circled with red color are attached to fluid bubbles, and the yellow ones are not. But this is a 2D section, so even some of the yellow ones might be attached to fluid bubbles if we look at this in 3 dimensions. And on the right side, you can see just zoomed in one of these sulfide fluid assemblages. So based on our experimental observations, we have produced this model. This is a wall rock, black shale, that contains pyrite and chalcopyrite. And then around the magma, there is this subsolidus dehydration zone, where there are these white sulfides, which are now pyrrhotite. And this is, as in the experiments, related to a release of a fluid phase. And if this fluid can find its way to magma, it could cause sulfide saturation at this point. In a later stage, a partial melting zone develops around the magma. And at the same time, the subsolidus dehydration zone migrates away from the magma. So there is still subsolidus dehydration happening further away. It can release fluid, but now it stalls to the partial melting zone. But this still keeps on enriching the partial melting zone with sulfur and copper further away from the wall rock. And also within this partial melting zone, these sulfides attach to fluid bubbles, and this might make it easier for them to find their way to the magma. So to summarize this up, first, during the subsolidus dehydration in the black shale wall rock, there could be assimilation of sulfur and copper and carbon by a fluid. And about half of the sulfur and more than almost 70% of the total copper could actually be in this fluid. So this could be very significant if it can travel to the magma. In a later states, probably between 900 and 1000 degrees, there could be assimilation of sulfur and copper via a melt phase from the wall rock to the magma. And this could happen either from the marginal zone of the contact aureole or from the xenoliths that are stoked by the magma. At this point, fluids further away could also provide more sulfur and copper to this partial melting zone, making the assimilation more efficient. And lastly, the fluid bubbles attach to sulfides, which could also enhance transportation. So that's all. Thank you very much for listening. If you want, you can follow this project on my supervisor's website. The link is here. And you can also follow the research group Twitter on this link. And in case you have any questions directly to me, my email address is here. So thank you very much.